All right, welcome. I'm talking with engineer Pat Sweet, professional engineer, in fact, PE. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you very much, Pius. It's nice to be back.
And this is part two. You were previously on this Engineering Word of the Day podcast to talk about another word, validation. And we're going to talk about a very related word pretty soon. But just real briefly, just as a recap, can you explain to everyone listening who you are, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Pat Sweet. I run a blog and a podcast called Engineering and Leadership, which you can find at engineeringandleadership.com or on iTunes. And what my work is all about is helping engineers and engineering teams do better work, to help engineers and teams thrive through an understanding of the business side and the management side, the soft skills of engineering. The whole idea being that throughout my own career, I recognize that the people who really advanced and the teams who really did fantastic work were teams that were well-rounded in that regard. So that's what I'm all about. So I do speaking, I do consulting, and that's the nature of the work.
And you have plenty of experience. You're up in Canada, but you travel all around, it sounds like, to help engineers and businesses do better work. And you're drawing on, I guess, your background in both business school and also your engineering background as a PE. I just wanted to ask you briefly before we get into our engineering jargon here. I'm going to ask you about another piece of engineering jargon, the PE, the Professional Engineering Designation. Can you explain what that is in case someone doesn't know?
Yeah, no, fair enough. In Canada, we to differentiate ourselves, we decided to call it P.Eng, but
I did not know that.
Yeah. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. Where I studied and where I practice in Canada, your professional engineering designation is an absolute requirement with respect to being able to certify drawings, for example. And really practice as an engineer. So in Canada, it would be very rare, I would say, for a practicing engineer not to be a P.Eng. And I believe it's similar to the requirements in the States. We have a law and ethics exam, there's experience requirements, education requirements. And in many Canadian provinces, but not all yet, which is a little bit funny, you also have continuing education requirements. So where I had been practicing in Ontario, there is currently no continuing education requirement. But I think it's probably the last province for that to be the case. I think there's a move afoot to change that right now.
So that actually does sound very similar to the U.S. case for the PE certification, where, like you said, there's continuing education, at least in most places, and you definitely had to get some education and take some tests, and you have to work under other professional engineers before you can get your own certification. So,
definitely.
I think the point is, you know what you're talking about.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. So this podcast is all about important engineering terms, or terms that engineers should know and maybe people outside of engineering should know. And the term that I wanted to bring up today is very much related to the term we spoke about last time. Last time we brought up validation as our engineering word of the day. And today I wanted to talk about verification, which I understand is one of your favorite engineering words.
Yeah, absolutely. So validation and verification together is one of my favorite kind of concepts.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, the last time we spoke, we talked about validation being building the right thing. Verification is about building that thing right. So where validation is designing something or doing something that actually satisfies the customer's need, that all happens on paper, right? You can explain to a client what you want to do for a design, and they can tell you, okay, that sounds great, that'll fit the need. Verification is what happens once you've actually built whatever it is you're doing, be that a process, a product, you name it. Verification is the act of testing or analyzing that product to make sure that whatever it is you designed actually performs as you expected. So let's say, for example, a client wants a car and you design a car. That's a valid design. But when you go to verify it, if that car doesn't go 200 kilometers an hour, and that was the requirement that the client gave you, then you have not produced a design that actually does the job. It may have been valid, but failed verification. So both of the V words are critical with respect to successful design.
You can't do just one or the other. An engineer has to do both.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because if you don't validate, you don't know that you built the right thing in the first place. And if you don't verify, you don't know that it really does what you said it would on paper.
That's a subtle difference. And I'm sure there are some people who, if they've never thought about those differences here, they're sitting there thinking about that.
Yeah.
How can someone learn more about these differences or think about these differences? Are there any ways to teach themselves the subtleties of this?
It's probably the best way to think about it is that in validation, it's the client who can validate, right? It's only the client who can tell you what you've done is right. But when you verify, that's something you check. That's
you as the
engineer.
engineer.
You as the engineer. And there are a couple different ways to verify your design. You can test it. You can do analysis. So, for example, structural engineers do finite element analysis. So instead of physically crushing their design, they can use a computer to figure out whether or not the stress and strain matches up with what they expected. You can verify something through design, which is kind of a silly thing. The idea there is if the client asks for something blue, you design it to be blue and you can see that it's blue, right?
Sure.
But the point there is that you do have to actually check at the end of the day that you've met all those requirements. Even the things that aren't really hard to verify, you still have to verify them. It's amazing how many simple things can get missed, especially in a complex design.
Sure. And so in the last conversation, the last episode, you had said that validation is kind of an ongoing process. You involve the client from the very beginning and you kind of keep on contacting the client and referring to the client to make sure that your design is being validated. Do you think that verification is something that engineers kind of do throughout the design cycle as well?
To some extent, yeah. Looking back through your old podcasts, I noticed one of the words of the day was iterate. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That was my first one.
So there's iteration occurs when you test over and over and over again, right? You can do iterative verification because often a design doesn't work the way you think it will the first time. So
right.
You go back to the drawing board, you try the design
I'm very
again.
familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who's practiced for any length of time can know that. But then you can also verify recursively. So recursion happens when you're doing the same process at different levels of the design. So, for example, you can verify a subsystem and say, okay, yep, that subsystem, all the tests passed, all the analysis looks good. Then that subsystem gets plugged into its parent system. So, for example, I mentioned before that I had worked in the rail industry.
Yeah.
Maybe you test a propulsion system, you verify it, and it does what it's meant to do. Well, how does that system now work once it's plugged into a full train? How does it interact with the train controls? How does it coordinate with the braking system? You have to verify the propulsion system at that level as well, once it's plugged into everything and it's part of the bigger picture. So verification, like validation, happens more than once. It's not a point in time. It can happen iteratively and recursively.
And it sounds like there's this hierarchy of it, like simpler tests and then more complicated tests. And we were bringing up even more engineering terms like subsystem, and you probably have to test at different levels of that system and subsystem.
Yeah, and it's a function of how complicated your design is and whether or not it makes sense to look at it through a systems engineering lens versus a simple or off the shelf design.
Right. Okay, well, I think that you've definitely helped clarify some differences between verification and validation, both very important steps when designing something. Any last words for the listeners about anything, about who you are and what you do?
Well, probably most importantly, if you want to learn more about what I do, I've got a ton of free material on my website on engineeringandleadership.com. And I do have a free 12-week engineering and leadership course that you can sign up for. Just take a look on, once you go on the website, just take a look at the right-hand sidebar and you can just plop your email in and sign up for that.
Perfect.
And I'll send you emails for the next couple of weeks.
All right. So, Pat, thank you so much. This is Pat Sweet, professional engineer, and you should check out his website and podcast, engineeringandleadership.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pius. It was a blast.
I'm Pius Wong. I'm an engineer who has a consulting education company called Pios Labs, and it's also a studio that produces this podcast and the K-12 Engineering Education Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support Pios Labs and myself, please do at www.patreon.com/Pios Labs, Pioslabs.